Hey everyone, and welcome back to a Peace interview. Today, the Peace Project presents a conversation with, drumroll please, Deepthi Murali, whose pronouns are she, her, hers, and who is a postdoctoral researcher at George Mason University who works on a number of digital history projects, including one with the Smithsonian, while also spearheading her own podcasts, including South Asian history podcast Masala History. She has her PhD from the University of Chicago in South Asian art history and is an advocate for diversity in academia. Now based in Virginia, Deepthi is deeply interested in cultures, transcultural interactions, and public history. In this interview, Deepthi and Peace interviewer Sharon talk about the experience of being 21st century scholars, Deepthi's dissertation research based around art, and more. So to hear the full conversation, watch the full interview, which begins in 3, 2, 1.
Hi everyone, my name is Sharon. I'm an interviewer at the Peace Project, and today I'm joined by an amazing scholar of South Asian history and art. She has definitely changed the way how I have viewed art and what the definition of art is. And I personally am a follower on her Instagram and have taken some of her diversity and career tips to heart. So I am so excited tonight to have Deepthi here for our Peace interview.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Would you introduce yourself?
My name is Deepthi Murali. I am a postdoctoral research fellow at the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media at George Mason University. I work on South Asian art history, particularly 18th and 19th century decorative arts of South India. And I work with colonial and transcultural encounters through art objects, but also through artistic practices in what could be considered sort of littoral India, sort of the coastal in South India. So that's my main gig, if you want to call it that. That's what my dissertation was on. But at the center where I work right now at Mason, I'm a digital history postdoctoral fellow. So I work on a number of different projects, including podcasts, which is sort of like my favorite thing to do. And you will hear more about that in a bit. But I also work on producing essays and teaching modules for a site called World History Commons, which are used by K through 12 educators. I also work as a project manager on a new HBCU project from the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. And then I work on my own digital art history project on Indian Ocean world textiles, specifically South Asian textiles circulating in the Indian Ocean world. I am a huge podcast fanatic and a podcast producer at the center, but I also have my own podcast, which is Masala History, which is at www.masalahistory.com. We talk about South Asian history and culture on the podcast. I am also the producer for PhD Futures Now, which is a brand new podcast about career diversity for PhDs, especially in the humanities in the United States, that is produced by Humanities Without Walls Consortium that runs out of Urbana-Champaign, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Phew.
You don't sound busy at all.
No, this year has been wasted.
Yeah, it doesn't sound productive at all. I also took a deep dive into Masala history yesterday, and I'm really excited to chat about that. But before we get too into that yet, because I want you to be able to run with it, you've already kind of touched on this, your academic specialization, your field of study, but what drew you to that field? How did you end up there?
Oh, it's a meandering pathway that I've taken to get where I've gotten. So I grew up in India. I am from India. I came here 13 years back to do my master's in historic preservation. My undergraduate degree was in architecture, and I was a terrible architect, like so terrible that, buildings should never come near me, just horrible. But I was good at architectural history and learning about old buildings and thinking about ways to interact with them and heritage. So historic preservation seemed a good idea to sort of find a career in. And then I came to the US in 2007, 2008 when the recession happened. So I graduated from my master's at UT Austin. And then I was like, what just happened? If you are anywhere near the housing business in any kind of architectural business, if you have a housing crisis that fueled an entire recession, there are no jobs. And so I started working a lot on trying to figure out what it is that I really wanted to do, what I kind of enjoyed. And there was this class that I took at UT Austin, which was an architectural history class. But the professor, Chris Long, he made it seem like a mystery. Like he would put up a slide of a building, like an American, like a house, and say, how can you find out when this was made and what kind of, where was this located? And he would ask all these questions and make us really understand architecture in a different way. And I was enamored with his teaching style, but also with this idea that we can't do this kind of a class for a South Asian building. We cannot think of this way of teaching, this pedagogical practice, because there's nothing there, especially for South India or Southwestern India, where I'm from originally, and nobody's working on it. And that kind of set me down this path of, when I went back to India next time, I kind of looked around and I wanted to understand what was there, what could be learned. And then eventually I figured out that if you were going to look at anything pre-15th century, very little was there. And that was like a longer task or a period of task. So it was really that idea of wanting to learn more about the things that I saw and I grew up with, knowing that nobody else was doing it, and that I had now this opportunity to maybe do this in an academic setting where that was actually possible. Because in India, you can't do that. You can't do the degree or the research that I did, because there is no art history in India. You can have archaeology, you can do architecture, which is like a practice-based subject, but there's no art history and or architectural history for that matter. And so this idea of studying centuries of unstudied, built environment really excited me. So I decided a PhD would be a good idea. And then this happened. Architect, historic preservationist, and then an art historian. So
I love it.
Long way around.
I love it. I mean, I was going to ask you if your career had been a pretty straightforward road, but you kind of outlined that it takes some turns, and that's okay, because I think where you landed is pretty neat, and you're doing some really neat things with where you landed. So I'm happy to follow along the winding journey.
Yeah, no, when people ask me what am I, like, what do I do now? I have like a bunch of things that I tell them. And then when they ask me, how did you get here? I have an even more winding story that I tell people. So I feel like I take a lot of time just introducing myself these days, which, well, occupational hazard.
Very true. I feel like that's an occupational hazard of anyone that comes out with a PhD. It's like, well, let me tell you my life story a little bit here. But kind of having to do with your PhD, having to do with your professional work, but also a little bit outside of that, what inspired you to start all of your podcasts? Do I dare say, have a favorite one that you like working on?
I shouldn't say this because I get paid for 2 of the podcasts, to do them. But the one that is my favorite is my own, which I don't get paid to do. So I will say it's Masala History because it kind of started my whole sort of digital history, public history journey. I started it with my best friend in while doing my PhD, because we had this horrible feeling while we were doing our research and writing that we're just talking to academics and we were just talking to people within academia about these things. But what about, like, I started doing the PhD because I thought no one else was looking at the buildings or the built environment or the art of southwestern India. And so now I was doing that, but I was only talking to people within my field or within either a South Asianist or an art historian or a historian. So we had this uncomfortable feeling that we weren't doing enough to reach out and have the kind of pedagogical practice that we both intended it to be. We were teaching because in our university, I have my PhD from the University of Illinois at Chicago. All PhD students teach either their own classes or once you're ABD, you can teach your own class, but before that you'll be assisting. But we did a lot of teaching on our own because we had a lot of discussion sections and so forth. So we were teaching, and we were teaching like 70 students maybe in a semester at most, but but that was it. And we started questioning our practice and our idea of why we began to do this in the first place. And so we were like, let's do something more interesting. Let's get this out. We should break the ivory tower mold. And so basically drank a lot of sangria. That's what happened. And then
You're
we
not
said,
condoning that, but that is the strategy.
and then we said, I love podcasts. I love listening to podcasts. I think it's the terrific way of getting information and entertainment. So I was like, and my best friend is not a podcast fan, but I was like, let's do a podcast. And so we decided to do it. We were sitting there eating Indian food and we were trying to name the podcast something. And, South Asia Humanities sounded very drab. And so then we saw the word masala and we were like, masala history. That makes perfect sense. so yeah, so that's where it actually began, in my living room at home, over sangria, trying to get South Asian history out of academia and into a more public forum. So that's how that happened.
I love that story because it kind of speaks to a larger question in history and art history right now of public history and who has access to this information and who can engage with this information. So it's amazing that that's something you identified within your field too, and you're the one making it public history. So I very much admire that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So since then, I think that question has become even more relevant over the last couple of years, with all that's happened in the US, but also around the world. We've been talking a lot about the rise of authoritarianism or the lack of an adequate understanding of sort of society or history and heritage, and how that kind of feeds into this sort of unaware practice of democracy. Different kinds of underlying conditions where we see the world in tumult, and the role of humanities in all this, and us as practitioners of humanities. And so I think the question of public history has become like a real a real issue in the humanities very broadly, but especially within disciplines like history and art history. And so, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's ontological, right? It's like unweaving how we learn or why we learned it that way. So it is a very interesting place to be in the humanities and in particularly in history at the moment.
Yeah.
Switching gears a little bit.
Yeah.
Also having to do with one of your podcasts. I know you're a big advocate of diversity in academia, not just ethnic diversity in academia, but also diversifying your own skill sets to make you marketable in the job market. So what are your best tips for pursuing academia and other projects? Any advice that you can give?
Yeah. Oh boy. This is why we have a whole new podcast, PhD Futures Now. One of the things that strikes me as it is an unfair thing to ask PhD students who are already doing a lot of things to now diversify their skills. That's like, I wanted to put that out there before I said anything else, because I think it's important to acknowledge the emotional and actual sort of labor, intellectual, physical, sometimes even financial, right? Like the things that you need to do when you say you have to diversify your skills. Most of the time, it also comes with the emotional labor of readjusting your thoughts and even your belief system, because when people pursue a humanities PhD, they're doing it for the money. None of us come here to become millionaires. That's for sure. So we have an entire belief system that has a very keen sense of thinking about ethics in a certain way, thinking about our own social responsibility in a certain way. And we have, from our experience, gathered that an educational enterprise, being at a university or teaching at a community college, is the way we are going to do our share. So our employment is not just employment, it's almost a calling in certain ways. And so to now say that, oh, that is not a viable path, but you have to now go down and look at other different paths where you might not be able to fulfill the social commitment that you thought you were going to fulfill, or do things that you think are ethical or unethical. Like, it's a shift in your belief system. So it's a lot of emotional labor in addition to all the other things that you have to do. And I completely understand that. And frankly, we shouldn't be asked to do it. And I say we because I'm a postdoc and I'm doing that as a postdoc. And over the last few years that I've gotten my PhD. And so, but having said that, we are the generation of scholars who actually are at the forefront of this particular problem, that the higher ed crisis, it is not going to be resolved in the next couple of years. And so we need to fend for ourselves. We need to think about what we can do and what kind of meaningful employment we can have. So with that long sort of roundabout way, to answer your question about what can you do to diversify your skill sets, it is important to think about why you started doing what you're doing right now in the first place. Mm-hmm. Did you do it because you were really interested in teaching? Were you really interested in a particular topic? Did you like the aspect of research? Is it because you really like traveling and like to go to very difficult places and stay there and learn from that place? Is it because you enjoyed the analytical aspect of it? Or is it because you like being an academic, or the idea of being an academic? Like you want to be able to first figure out what it is that you enjoy about what you do right now, and then work from there. So the first thing is to really, tell yourself and that this has to be done. There has to be a conscious choice to be able to set aside time to diversify your skill sets. Second, you have to understand why you're doing it and where you're going to get started. And then the third is to actually find the skills and then learn those skills. In my case, the reason I even have this postdoctoral fellowship is because of my podcast. That has been my entry. And I learned podcasting on my own. I basically Googled and YouTubed my way in. I had a MacBook, which has GarageBand, which is a free Mac. It comes with MacBook. So I recorded one, and then I fiddled around and found Audacity, which is like a free production software. And I played around with that. And then I listened to other podcasters talking about podcasts. And so slowly, and you'll see that Masala History still has episode 1 through now. And you will see, I will never ask anyone to listen to anything other that's below episode 9. It is just, no, maybe episode 7. Anything below the episode on Emperor Jahangir, please don't listen. Like, it's just horrible, because I'm still learning, and you can see my process of learning as I go along the years. And it obviously there's a lot of start and stops because you're doing a PhD, you're doing dissertation. My best friend is also writing her dissertation, so we have breaks, we have gaps. We come back to it, we stop sometimes, then we change formats. All those things happen because it's a learning process. So Masala History kind of shows how a podcaster becomes a podcast. In a way, and there's also a lot of work involved. We had to do a lot of research, and the only reason I think I was able to develop those skills is because I love doing it. I love learning a new skill, and so it was my hobby, really taking some time away from doing the work that I should be doing, productive procrastination, if you will. But I knew that this is the way I wanted to go. I knew that I wanted to think about art history in a digital space. I wanted to think about art history as cultural history, and as public history. So I knew these were some of the skills that I eventually wanted to incorporate into my teaching or into my research as I go along. So it was, I would say, an organic choice also. So to find that niche, I don't know which. Potato, yes. So to find that niche and then sort of to really push myself there was, I think, an important choice. And so when this digital history postdoc happened, I had something to say like, hey, I kind of do digital history because I have a podcast and it is sort of digital public history. And so I don't have any skills in R or MySQL or Python or anything that computational historians use, but I can learn those because I've learned this on my own. And I think that helped. So I would say those are the tips that I will have.
It's as much of an investment in you as like getting a PhD is almost.
Yes.
You're very much investing in how you can be read at the end of it all.
Being an academic means you are not retraining yourself, but you consistently learn and grow as a scholar. Other professions don't quite learn, but they retrain. There is always a new software. If you're a software engineer, if you're a doctor, you're not learning a new skill. If you're an engineer, there are some new tools that you have to, constantly sort of up. And academics don't do that. Academics actually just do more learning in the small field that they kind of are specialized in. And that model is, I think, quickly becoming outdated, principally because that was happening because there was a tenure track system that allowed you to grow as a scholar in that way. And I think that system is on its way out, mainly because it's unsustainable. Higher education universities have made it unsustainable, and they're not hiring tenure tracks. And so without the backing of that tenure track system, I think that kind of scholarship is impossible. And so the more you can be cognizant of that and think of you as a scholar, but as a scholar of the 21st century, a scholar who might not be tenured, you might remain contingent faculty for a long time and still continue to do the kind of work that you want to do. I think that would also be helpful. And so it's not just your PhD, but it's about what you want to do with your PhD in different ways.
I love that. 21st century scholar.
Yeah.
It seems so shiny and cool.
It is. We both know. Not really, but yeah, no. We need to change with the times. I mean, we are being forced to change with the times. Would I like a tenure track job and continue to dig deeper and deeper into the sort of the littoral decorative arts? I'm so enthused about. There's so much to study there. Nobody's doing that work. Yes, and I will get back to it at some point. But in the meantime, I have to think of the ways in which I can be useful and my degree can be useful in the world that we live in today. So
how you can sustain yourself.
Yeah, that too. Yes.
Yeah. How has COVID-19 impacted your work? Has it impacted your work significantly?
Oh, well, I have a kid. He's been homeschooling, but I had a fellowship in my last year of PhD into 2019, 2020. So I was already home. And we had just moved from Chicago, where we were based for many years, to Northern Virginia, where we live now. And so I didn't really know that many people here. And I did not have my home university. So I was really working from home. So my quarantine started in 2019, June.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to everybody else in 2020. So for me, work wise, like it didn't really change because I was already working from home. But my dissertation changed a little bit because I couldn't access, I had some materials at the Library of Congress, I had some materials at the Smithsonian that I wanted to work with, and I couldn't get to that. I couldn't get library books because I was writing my last two chapters. Just as the pandemic hit. So that didn't happen. And so in that sense, I haven't met even one of my colleagues at Mason because my interview was online. It happened in March last year. And so I've not been to campus, and I have not seen any of the people I've been working with since I started my postdoc. So it's a little bizarre, and it's odd, but like I'm a person who do kind of get a lot of happiness from doing the work that I do. So I think if I wasn't working, I would have gone bonkers with the pandemic. But the work has actually helped keep in check. I also am a person who really believes in taking a break from work when you can't do things. So I don't put pressure on myself to publish, although there are people telling me all the time to publish. And I'm taking it slow and steady, and I refuse to fall into the trap of the rat race of having to publish to get a tenure track job, because I have to constantly remind myself there are no tenure track jobs out there. So, but COVID has really changed my career plans. I think COVID has made it very clear that tenure track is likely not an option, because if there were any jobs at all, those jobs have dried up. And so it's given me, it sort of hastened that reality a little bit, not just for me, I think for a lot of people. And so I would say, while my work hasn't really changed, timing has changed. I've had to work at nights, especially when I was doing my dissertation. I was just working at nights and sleeping during the afternoons because my son needed some homeschooling help. He was in kindergarten then, so there was absolutely no control. Self-control there. And so I think those kind of work routines and things changed. But what really changed for me is this idea that I'll likely not be pursuing a tenure track career actively.
Mm-hmm. And I think in terms of access and not being able to go to libraries, not being able to go into archives, for me, it's just highlighted how essential digital history is now becoming, and
Yes.
in a situation like this too.
Yes. Yeah, no, totally. I think museums especially have been having a realization. You can comment more on that because you're in the thick of things. But I keep seeing these pieces by museum professionals about the digital and how we should be thinking about the digital world. And we are doing this project with the Smithsonian, and we've been talking to a lot of museums professionals and archivists from the HBCUs, and all of them say, our numbers have gone up. Like all our Zoom attendees, like, for our programs have gone up. We have more, clicks on our websites, and that's gone up. And so I think it has really highlighted the advantages of looking at digital history and the tools that digital history offers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, from a museum space perspective, it is definitely now, I think it's been forced to be made a priority. And now it's almost not shameful or not shocking, but it's almost like, bummer, this museum isn't hip with the times. I can't do my, research for my undergrad paper if this museum hasn't digitized XYZ manuscript. So
Yeah.
it's also very heartening too, because it seems like a lot more people feel like they're able to access things online, and so they're not
Yeah.
afraid to approach quite literally an ivory tower. Like
Yeah.
going into an
Yeah.
archive is scary. It's like you're surrounded by marble walls and like the atrium of a space, especially someplace like the Smithsonian, or the Library of Congress, and you're like, oh, do I belong here? Am I allowed? But scrolling it from the comfort of your own home, I think, makes it very accessible too.
Yeah, no, there's no question about it, especially if you think about um, like people like you and I who work far away from the locations where our subjects of study are located. Just imagine what digitization would do, what makes, if it's really truly digitally accessible, there are more people who are going to be working on these things, and that's important too, to attract a future generation of scholars, like, without making it so hard to find funding, to take that time to have to travel, which is great. I have enjoyed every bit of it, but that shouldn't be a barrier to humanistic study. And I think the making more things digitally accessible and available really, really gets to that
Mhm.
accessibility issue.
Mhm. We've talked about this a little bit, on a personal level, uh, about the presence of imposter syndrome and not feeling like you
No.
belong in a space, especially in an academic space, in a PhD space. But was there ever a moment where you felt like, I have made it? I am a scholar, I am a historian. Was there ever a moment like that for you?
No. I looked at that question and I just went, when have I thought that I made it? It's not every time, like, like a scholar of that of kind of says, oh, I've heard of you, or I know you. I'll be like, really? You do?
Mhm.
Because you feel like you're there. But I don't think so. I think if you feel like you've made it, I don't know. It'll take me a lot. It'll take a lot for me to feel like I've made it. I'd have to, I don't know, get a Pulitzer or Peabody or something. I guess I don't know. I don't know. I've never felt like I made it. I do feel a lot of. Uh, I did feel a lot of. I want to say mostly relief, but also a lot of satisfaction when I got a postdoc before I graduated, because that was not expected. And I'm the first to tell you there's a lot of luck involved in it. You have to be at the right place at the right time. But I also know it's because I did diversify my skills. And I did look beyond my dissertation while I was still doing my dissertation, that allowed me to have that opportunity. So I'm very satisfied that I was able to actually carve out something that works for me, um, and 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 luckily enough be able to do what I'm doing and do something enjoyable, because a lot of people are not getting that option, um, to do that.
Mhm. Well, it's both heartening and slightly terrifying to hear that the imposter syndrome never goes away, because
Oh
I've been
no,
the
I
beginning
had
of
one
the
today.
academic world, and you're past the PhD, and it's still.
It doesn't go away. My advisor, who is the chair of my program, Catherine, sorry that I'm talking about this. She was telling me that was feeling like an imposter the other day, and I was like, really, it never goes away. And she's like, really, never goes away. So it's not going away. I'm sure you can find the senior most scholar in your field and ask them, and they'd still say, um, it's there. So
But we are diversifying our skill sets, and we are learning more about ourselves and learning more about the market,
yes,
and put us in a good place. Um, do,
hopefully that's the hope. That's a hope.
um, do you have any particular advice for aspiring AAPI students in particular, who may want to enter academia, or see themselves possibly studying something that has to do with their heritage or identity? Any words of advice for them in particular?
I would say know what, like, this is something that I think I will tell everyone who's trying to make it in academia. Know what you're getting into. Be very, very, go into it with your eyes open. If you're doing this for a tenure track job, that's not happening. I know I'm talking about this obsessively in this conversation, but I think one of the things that I knew, because my advisor kind of told me that, funding is a problem. She was very sort of like forthright about it, because she didn't want me to come in with like rose-colored glasses. And I'm very thankful that she was there to tell me that. So I knew. Of course, we didn't know when I started also that the sort of academic employment crisis would be such a huge deal. I think people still don't know about that. And so I think which is why I kind of insist on mentioning it at any academic, quasi-academic event that I'm part of, because that's very important to know. Specifically for AAPI, I would say don't expect other people to be as knowledgeable of what you're studying as you are, even when you start out. So you have to do a little bit of what I would call infrastructure building, intellectual infrastructure building. So when you talk about your projects, start with a brief introduction of the place, space, time, context, even if that sounds really boring. If you're trying to get into, so what I mean by that is, even if you're trying to get into an academic program, tell everyone as best as you can the relevance of your work. Why is it important to study this thing at this time, if you're applying to a particular institution in that institution? And that's very important, because only you know why it's so relevant and it's so important to study. Don't expect others to know or understand without you convincing them. So it's your job to actually bring them onto your side. And it's always something you want to consider in any conference you speak, in any event any admission essays you write, or any conference or any articles you publish. It is your job to convince people that what you're studying is important and relevant.
I think I just learned so much from what you said. I'm like mulling it over in my brain, like, okay, this is what I need to do now, thinking about it in my own work. That's great advice. Everyone should really listen to it. Okay, last question for me. Do you have a favorite just overall project? And you could talk about your podcasts again, and that could be included, but was there like a fun, maybe extra PhD project or within your PhD that really spoke to you?
So I have a lot of fun with podcasts generally, but I think I feel guilty about not mentioning my dissertation research. I've had a lot of fun doing my dissertation research. I work on decorative art objects, but basically objects that were made and used in a courtly setting in South India. And in the 18th and 19th century, I've been studying them as transcultural objects, because they were made in this littoral sphere where different cultures kind of mingled, and different artistic practices were extant. But I think the best part about doing that kind of work has been really interacting with the objects. So, for example, I spent almost 3 years trying to get access to a chariot that was the royal state chariot of the princely state of Travancore in South India. And it was at this museum in Trivandrum in the state of Kerala in South India. And I spent years trying to get access to it, and finally I did. And when I say access, it is, you can see it, but you can't go near it, you can't photograph it. And if you're an art historian, if you can't go near it and you can't photograph it, there's no research. So finally I did get access, and then I went near, and it's a beautiful chariot, and I'll try to send you. It looks like a temple chariot, and then it's got like these boy angels with a parrot in the hand, sort of like at the corners, the cusps of the arches of the chariot, and they are just holding onto this parrot, and it's like really big and massive. And then I see on the floor there's like one of the wings of the parrot. This is made in 1849, so it's a pretty old one, right? One of its kind. And there's a wing, a little wing, green colored wing on the floor, all dusty. And so I pick it up, and I'm like, there's this caretaker who's standing there. And I was like, hey, excuse me, there's this wing. What would you want me to do with it? Like, should you attach it? And they don't have a conservator, nothing. And so he's like, you can take it if you want. And I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, I mean, it's fallen off, you can take it if you want. And I'm like, and then, there are these two realities that kind of coincide, like, what theorists might call double consciousness, like, of being like a person who just loves this thing and, is like enamored with this chariot, and just, it's beautiful and gorgeous, and, you're right next to it and you're so happy about it. And then there is this sort of American, sort of more serious scholar who's like, doing serious scholarly work. And those two battle for a second there. I was like, should I take the parrot, the bird's wing? Like, would anyone even notice? Nobody would notice. And he's told me to take it. And then I was scared that somebody else would throw it away. So I basically took the wing and then threw it inside the chariot so that nobody would even go there. But it was like, there are such instances of like bizarre interactions with objects and people that are so much fun when you actually do on-site research and work with older objects in places where such study is not the norm. And so my favorite project is still my dissertation, I would say, because I've had so much fun with it.
The collections manager, the museum collections manager in me, which is what I do professionally, I'm kind of like, oh my gosh.
yeah, I thought you were just going to have like a heart attack. You're like, ah.
But there's a fair bit of that in, I think, any museum or archive that you'll work in or with. I was working with a Revere bell the other day up in an old church steeple, and the facilities director was like, you want to ring it? And I was like, it's not on the hour. Like, what do you mean? He's like, just lift the hammer. You want to ring it? I did battle with myself, but the logical, like, no.
Did you ring it?
Manager. No, I didn't. I let him ring it.
Oh,
he's like
okay,
actually qualified to handle it. But a part of me was like, just reach out your hand and take the hammer and ring it.
Just do it. I've had so many instances of it. There is an ivory throne also in Kerala that I study, and it was like, it's nobody gets to see it. I still don't have a photograph of it. I have a couple, but from like available sources, but I wasn't able to photograph it. And I was in there, and this throne is well loved. Like, this throne belonged to a king in the 1829-30 period, and he is like a classical music maestro, and his name is Swati Tirunal Ramavarma. But like, there is this throne, it's beautifully sculpted with ivory, and it's just gorgeous. And the caretaker, because the throne belonged to this king who was like a musical maestro, when I go there would be a small, like these old-fashioned tape recorders, with a tape. And it would be actually repeating the kirtans that this king composed. And I was like, what's going on? And he's like, the throne would like to listen to some of this because it probably had it in its lifetime. And so they were playing this music for the throne because the throne would have that. So it was like really like so committed to like taking care of the throne in like a psychosomatic ways that we don't often think about in like a Western museum setting. But also, funnily enough, I said, oh, there's dust on this. And he said, maybe I can bring the vacuum from home and sort of vacuum it out, a 200-year-old throne. Like, and I was like, no, let's not use the vacuum on this thing. So there are these kind of contradictions that you come across when you study these objects, which are a lot of fun, really.
Yeah. If you're a history buff, working with objects is pretty dang cool.
I know, I agree, totally agree.
Yeah. Well, that's all the questions I have for you. Is there anything that you want to part our piece viewers with, impart on them?
So I don't know if you want to include this bit, but I've my I'm I'm from India, and I've recently become an American citizen, and so yay. But my son is born here, and he is sort of Asian American in for real. Right, because his consciousness is always going to be a hybrid of different identities in a way that mine won't actually be, or it would be different from the way mine would be, I should say. And I always think about what we think about as culture and heritage and how it is different for each generation. And so I am so happy for like the Peace Project to be able to bring these different kinds of, even within like the AAPI community, there are like different kinds of generational identities, or like apart from cultural identities. And I'm so happy to see things like Peace Project, take the responsibility of actually getting all those views out there and bringing them together, and it's really great.
Thank you. We loved having you, and we are so excited that you agreed to chat with us. I really hope that our viewers have learned a little bit of something. All of Deepti's info, her podcast, and everything will drop somewhere on the screen.
On the screen.
Give her a follow and check out all of her hard work.
Yes, Masala History would really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, for watching this interview. And if you have any suggestions for interviews, let us know.
For a glimpse into the work Deepthi has done, here's some behind-the-scenes content of the podcast PhD Futures Now.
Today on PhD Futures Now, we are joined by Leonard Cassuto and Robert Weisbuch, co-authors of a new book entitled The New PhD, How to Build a Better Graduate Education.
Thanks for watching, and peace out.